Your little mud puddle is now serving the greater good, Mr. Caldwell. The prestigious Pines Golf Course requires a certain standard, and a drought is no excuse to let it fall. Karen stood there, a monument to entitlement clad in a pastel pink tracksuit, her arms crossed over her substantial chest as if she were a general surveying a conquered territory. Her smirk was the punctuation mark on a sentence of pure audacity. Behind her, a thick, grimy hose snaked from a massive pump on a trailer, plunged into the heart of what was once my pond, my sanctuary. The pump's diesel engine chugged with a greedy, rhythmic cough, the death rattle of a 10-year ecosystem I had painstakingly nurtured. The water level was already horrifically low, exposing a muddy, cracked shoreline that looked like a scar on the face of my land. A few of my prize koi, fish I had named and fed by hand, flopped weakly in the shrinking, muddy soup, their vibrant orange and white scales caked in filth. They were suffocating. The greater good she spoke of was the unnatural, chemical green perfection of the 18th fairway, which bordered the far side of my property. I wasn't even a member of her ridiculous HOA. My 5 acres were my own, bought and paid for with 2 decades of service in the Army Corps of Engineers. A place I had chosen specifically because it was not governed by petty tyrants in tracksuits. Yet here she was, the self-appointed queen of prestigious pines, draining my private property as if it were her personal water cooler. The rage that surged through me was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the humid afternoon air. It was the kind of focused anger I hadn't felt since a tour in Fallujah. My hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. I could see the pump operator, a lanky kid in a grease-stained t-shirt, deliberately avoiding my gaze, knowing full well this was theft on a grand scale. "Turn it off," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Karen actually laughed, a short barking sound. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just water. We'll be done in an hour. Think of it as your community contribution." She waved a dismissive hand as if shooing away a fly. That was it. That was the moment the switch flipped. The calm, retired engineer who just wanted to fish in his pond and be left alone was gone. In his place stood the man who had designed and overseen the construction of forward operating bases in the middle of deserts, a man who understood topography, water flow, and leverage better than anyone. She had just declared war, and she had no earthly idea of the kind of enemy she had just made. This was the beginning of the end for Karen and her perfectly manicured kingdom. If you've ever had to deal with an HOA that thinks it owns the air you breathe, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below with your own nightmare story. You are not going to want to miss how this unfolds because what she saw as a simple water theft, I saw as a tactical opportunity. The battle for my pond was about to become the flood that drowned her entire world. My first move wasn't to scream or to threaten, though every fiber of my being wanted to. It was to document. I pulled out my phone and started recording, my voice a steady, emotionless monotone as I narrated the scene. Date, August 14th. Time, 14:32 hours. Location, my private property at 1120 Old Creek Road. This is Karen Miller, president of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association, overseeing the unauthorized and illegal draining of my private pond. I made sure to pan slowly, capturing Karen's smug face, the pump truck with its company logo clearly visible, the hose trespassing across my property line, and the devastating state of my pond, lingering on the dying fish. Karen's smile faltered. "What do you think you're doing? You can't film me." "I can and I am," I replied, my eyes locked on hers through the phone screen. "This is evidence. Every gallon of water you steal, every fish that dies, every dollar of damage you cause is being recorded." I then walked over to the pump operator. "Son, I want your name and the name of your employer. You are currently participating in grand theft and destruction of private property. I'm giving you one chance to shut down that pump and leave before you are named as a co-defendant in the lawsuit." The kid's eyes went wide. He looked from me to Karen, his Adam's apple bobbing. "He's just bluffing, Timmy," Karen shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "You work for us. You do as I say." But the threat of legal action, of being personally sued, was more real to him than the fury of a woman in a pink tracksuit. He hesitated, then his hand moved toward the kill switch. "Don't you dare," Karen bellowed. but it was too late. With a final sputtering cough, the diesel engine died. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the pathetic splashing of my dying fish. Karen's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed violently with her outfit. She marched toward the operator, but I stepped in her way. I'm not a huge man, but I'm solid, and 2 decades in the military teaches you how to project an immovable presence. Your business here is concluded, I said. She jabbed a finger at my chest. This isn't over, Caldwell. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will bury you in fines and legal fees until you beg to sell this dump. She then spun on her heel and stormed off toward her golf cart, which was parked just on the edge of the fairway, a chariot for a wannabe dictator. The operator, Timmy, looked at me, terrified. I'm sorry, mister. She just said it was an emergency and it was all cleared. I nodded, my anger softening slightly toward him. He was just a pawn. I know. Now get your equipment off my land and expect a call from my lawyer. He scrambled to uncouple the hoses, his movements frantic. I spent the next hour with a bucket, trying to save what I could. I managed to transfer a handful of the smaller fish and a few dozen tadpoles to a large stock tank I had in the barn, filling it with well water. But the big ones, my beautiful koi, Ghost, Big Red, Sunshine, were gone. I laid them out on the grass, their colors already fading. The financial loss was significant. Those fish were worth thousands, but the emotional cost was immeasurable. That pond was my therapy. It was where I processed the things I'd seen, the friends I'd lost. It was a living, breathing thing, and she had killed it for the sake of green grass. That evening, I sat at my large oak dining table, the dead quiet of the house, a stark contrast to the storm in my head. I called my old Army buddy, Dave, now one of the sharpest property lawyers in the state. I explained everything, my voice still tight with controlled fury. Dave listened patiently, letting me vent before he spoke. Okay, Jack. First deep breath. We've got her. This is so far over the line it's not even funny. But we have to do this by the book. Your military discipline is our greatest asset here. From this moment on, you are a machine of pure logic and documentation. His words centered me. He was right. Raw emotion would get me nowhere. This had to be a campaign, fought with precision and overwhelming force. What's the first step? I asked. Total damage assessment, he said. I want a certified aquatic biologist out there tomorrow to assess the ecological damage. I want a real estate appraiser to quantify the loss of value to your property. Get receipts for the fish you bought. Itemize everything. We're going to build a mountain of damages so high she won't be able to see the top of it. Secondly, I want every piece of paper you can find. Your deed, your property survey, county water ordinances, everything. And third, do not talk to her. Do not answer her calls. Do not engage. From now on, I am your voice. The war had begun, and I was now assembling my armory. It wouldn't be guns and ammo, but something far more devastating to a creature like Karen. Facts, laws, and a bill she could never hope to pay. The next morning, I was on the phone before the sun was fully up, executing Dave's instructions with military precision. I found a highly respected aquatic biologist from the State University, Dr. Anya Sharma, who agreed to come out that afternoon. I explained the situation, and the professional indignation in her voice was palpable. Next, I called a certified property appraiser, a gruff old-timer named Frank, who specialized in rural and unique properties. He agreed to meet me on site the following day. My mission for the morning was intelligence gathering. I drove into town to the county records office. The smell of old paper and dust a familiar comfort. I requested copies of my original deed, the full plat map for my 5 acres, and, crucially, the plat maps and incorporation documents for the entire prestigious Pines development. I also requested any and all documents related to water rights and easements filed in the last 30 years for both my parcel and the adjacent HOA land. The clerk, a kindly woman with a mountain of white hair, looked at me over her glasses. Big project? Something like that, I said, just doing my due diligence. As the printer hummed and spat out page after page, I sat at a dusty table and began to read. It was exactly as I remembered from when I bought the place. My property was a holdout, a parcel of an old farm that was sold off piece by piece. The developer of prestigious Pines had tried to buy it, but the original owner refused, and I had inherited that independence. My deed was ironclad, with no easements granted to the HOA for anything, least of all water. Then I started digging into their paperwork. Prestigious Pines was built in the late 90s, during a development boom. I found their original water use permits from the state's Department of Environmental Quality. They were allocated a specific volume of water from the municipal supply and were permitted to draw a certain amount from two large wells located on their own property. Their golf course, I noted, was notoriously thirsty, designed with non-native grasses that required immense amounts of irrigation. I cross-referenced their permitted water usage with the public municipal water records for the last 5 years. A clear pattern emerged. In dry years like this one, their municipal consumption didn't spike as much as one would expect. It was almost as if they were getting water from somewhere else. My pond was likely just the most recent and most blatant victim. Dr. Sharma arrived that afternoon, her expression grim as she surveyed the muddy crater. She took samples of the soil, the remaining sludge, and the few dead invertebrates she could find. She documented the dead fish I had laid out. "This is a complete ecosystem collapse," she stated, her voice clipped and professional. "To rebuild this, to restore the bacterial colonies, the plant life, the insect and amphibian populations, you're looking at years of work and significant cost. The loss of the mature koi is just the most visible part of the devastation." She promised a full report within a week, complete with a detailed breakdown of the ecological damage and a multi-phase restoration plan with a projected cost that she estimated would be well into the 5 figures. That evening, I sat at my table again, which was now covered in maps and documents. I had my original survey map, a large blueprint-sized document spread out under a lamp. I traced the lines with my finger, the boundaries of my land, the topography, the notation of a small intermittent creek that fed the pond. Then I saw it. On the other side of my property, bordering the 12th and 13th fairways, was another notation, almost faded with age. It was a line marked historical drainage easement, with an arrow indicating the flow of water. It originated from a stream up in the hills behind my property, crossed a corner of my land, and then, according to this old map, continued straight across the land where the golf course now sat. I cross-referenced it with the modern HOA plat map. The stream was still there, but it had been diverted. A large concrete-lined channel now routed the water into a reservoir the HOA used for irrigation. The very reservoir that was likely running low and prompted Karen's raid on my pond. But the original natural path of that water, according to a map that predated her entire kingdom, was straight through her precious fairways. An idea began to form in my mind, a seed of tactical brilliance planted in the fertile ground of my engineering background. Draining my pond was an act of aggression. But what if I could legally and rightfully restore a natural feature of my own property that would, as a consequence, create a strategic nightmare for them? This was no longer just about getting compensated for my pond. This was about dismantling their ability to ever threaten me or anyone else again. The plan would require more research, more precision, but the path forward was becoming terrifyingly clear. Karen Miller wanted to play with water. I was about to show her what a flood looked like. The next few days were a blur of methodical preparation. Frank, the appraiser, came out and was visibly angered by what he saw. "I've been doing this for 40 years, son," he grumbled, walking the perimeter of the cracked, barren pond bed. "You can put a price on the fish, on the landscaping. On the well, you might have to drill to refill it. But the loss of aesthetic and recreational value? That's huge. This was the centerpiece of your property. It's like ripping the diamond out of a ring." His official appraisal of the diminution of value came back even higher than I expected, a number that made my eyes widen. Added to Dr. Sharma's ecological restoration estimate, the total damages were already climbing into the high 5 figures, a sum that would be a significant blow to the HOA's budget. While those reports were being finalized, I focused on the historical drainage easement. I spent another full day at the county office, this time in the engineering and planning department. I dug through older topographical surveys and aerial photographs from before the golf course was built. The evidence was undeniable. The stream in the hills, which the locals called Miller's Creek, an irony that was not lost on me, had historically flowed across that land. The developers of prestigious pines had re-engineered the landscape, diverting the creek into their reservoir without, it seemed, properly extinguishing the original drainage easement. It was a shortcut, a cost-saving measure that had been buried under 30 years of landscaping and bureaucracy. Armed with this mountain of evidence, I met Dave at his office. His conference room was stark and modern, a world away from my rustic home. I laid out the maps, the photos, the reports, and the county documents in neat piles on the polished mahogany table. He listened intently as I walked him through my findings, his expressions shifting from sympathetic to predatory. When I got to the part about the historical drainage easement, he leaned forward, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Jack, you magnificent bastard," he said, tapping the old survey map. "This is it. This is the kill shot." He explained the legal doctrine. An easement like that, if never properly and legally extinguished, often remains valid. The fact that I was the owner of the land the easement crossed gave me certain rights, including the right to maintain it and ensure the natural flow of water. "They built their whole irrigation system on a faulty premise," Dave explained, his excitement growing. "They diverted a natural waterway for their own benefit, and now you have the legal right to undivert it. To restore it to its natural course," I corrected, a slight smile touching my lips. "Exactly," he chuckled. "Restore it. All you'd be doing is performing necessary maintenance on your own property to restore a documented historical watercourse. If that watercourse happens to run through the sand trap on the 13th hole and bisect the 14th fairway, that's a problem of their own making." The beauty of it was its simplicity and its unimpeachable legality. We drafted the first official communication. It was a formal demand letter sent via certified mail to the HOA board, care of Karen Miller. It was a masterpiece of legal threat. It laid out in excruciating detail the events of August 14th, citing the exact statutes for theft, trespassing, and destruction of property. It included the preliminary damage estimates from Dr. Sharma and Frank, totaling a figure that was just shy of $75,000. It demanded immediate payment and a formal written apology. Then, as a final, brutal paragraph, it informed them that I would be commencing erosion control and landscape restoration activities on my property in the coming weeks, in accordance with county permits and my property rights, which included the restoration of natural historical water flows as documented on official survey maps. We didn't explicitly say what that meant, but any competent lawyer would understand the implication. We were putting them on notice. The trap was set. A week later, the response came. It was not a check or an apology. It was a letter from a high-powered law firm in the city, the kind with names on the letterhead that sounded like old money and arrogance. The letter was a work of art in dismissive bluster. It claimed the HOA acted under an emergency community doctrine to protect the value of all properties, a legal theory they seemed to have invented whole cloth. It accused me of hoarding a community water resource, my private pond, and countersued for the cost of the pump rental. Regarding my planned restoration, they warned me that any action that altered water flow and affected HOA property would be met with an immediate injunction and a lawsuit for damages that would run into the millions. It was signed by a senior partner, a man whose name I looked up and found was a regular golf buddy of the prestigious Pines Club Pro. Karen had clearly gone to her cronies, and they had decided to double down, convinced they could bully me into submission with the threat of overwhelming legal fees. They had no idea that their arrogant letter was the final piece of evidence I needed. It was proof that they were officially notified of my intentions and had chosen a path of confrontation rather than negotiation. The legal ground under my feet had just turned to solid granite. I called Dave. "We got their response," I said. "Good," he replied. "Now you have a documented good faith attempt to resolve this and their hostile refusal. You're clear to proceed, Jack. File the permits, hire the crew. Just make sure you do everything exactly by the book." The final phase of the operation was about to begin. The first step in turning my plan into reality was bureaucracy. I drove back to the county planning department, but this time I wasn't there for research. I was there to file. I submitted an application for a land improvement and erosion control permit. My proposal was simple and utterly defensible. I intended to clear a clogged, historical drainage channel on my property to prevent upstream flooding and soil erosion during heavy rains. I attached copies of the old survey maps, topographical data, and even a brief environmental impact statement that noted this action would restore a natural riparian habitat. There was nothing in my application about a golf course. There was no mention of the HOA. It was a straightforward, technically sound, and environmentally responsible project confined entirely to my own land. The county engineer, a practical man named Bill with a coffee-stained shirt and a no-nonsense attitude, reviewed my plans. He recognized my name from my own time working on public works projects after I'd left the service. "Caldwell," he said, nodding, "this looks solid. Restoring a natural watercourse is always better than letting it silt up. You've got your hydrology reports, your survey maps. This is textbook. Should be no problem." He stamped my application approved with a satisfying thud. The permit was my shield. It was the government's official blessing. With that document in hand, any attempt by Karen to stop the work would be an obstruction of a legally sanctioned activity. Next, I needed a crew. I didn't want a big corporate excavation company that might have ties to the developers or the HOA. I needed a small, loyal, and efficient team. I called a man named Marcus, a retired Navy Seabee who ran a small excavation and landscaping business with his two sons. Seabees are the construction battalions of the Navy. They can build and demolish anything, anywhere. Marcus and I had served on different branches, but we spoke the same language of logistics, machinery, and getting the job done right. I explained the project to him over coffee, laying out the survey maps on the hood of his Ford F-250. I was honest about the situation. "The goal is to clear this old channel, Marcus. It's about 20 feet wide and runs for about 200 yards across my property. It's overgrown, but the original channel is still there. We just need to dig it out and reinforce the banks." I then pointed to where the channel exited my property line. "The thing is, the moment this channel is clear, it's going to divert Miller's Creek, and its natural course runs right through the prestigious Pines Golf Course." Marcus looked from the map to me, a slow grin spreading across his weathered face. "So we're not just digging a ditch, we're redirecting a river. We are restoring a historical watercourse based on a county-approved permit," I corrected him, my tone deadpan, "and we're doing it to prevent erosion." "Right. Erosion control," he said, letting out a deep laugh. "I love it. When do we start?" We set a date for the following Monday. The long-range forecast was predicting a major weather system moving in toward the end of that week, a series of thunderstorms that were expected to drop several inches of rain. The timing was critical. I wanted the channel to be ready, but I didn't want it sitting open for too long, giving the HOA time to mount a complex legal challenge. The plan was to execute the work in a 72-hour blitz. Monday and Tuesday for excavation, Wednesday for reinforcing the banks with riprap and erosion control matting. By the time the storm hit on Thursday or Friday, Project Floodgate would be complete. The weekend before the work began was quiet, the calm before the storm. I saw Karen a few times, driving her golf cart along the fairway, bordering my dead pond, pointing it out to her passengers with a smug look on her face. She was gloating, confident that her lawyers had scared me off. She had no idea that the real threat wasn't a lawsuit. It was a man with a permit, a plan, and a friend with a very large excavator. On Monday morning, at 700 hours sharp, Marcus's convoy arrived. A lowboy trailer carrying a gleaming yellow Caterpillar, 320 excavator, a dump truck, and his work truck. The sound of the heavy machinery rolling down my long driveway was the opening salvo of my counterattack. As the excavator's tracks bit into the ground, I saw a golf cart screech to a halt on the far side of the property. It was Karen. She stood up in the cart, hands on her hips, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. The work had begun. The trap was about to be sprung. The moment the excavator's bucket took its first massive bite out of the earth, I knew she wouldn't just watch. Karen came barreling across the fairway in her golf cart, ignoring the property line and driving right up to the edge of the work zone. Marcus, perched high in the cab of the excavator, simply swung the machine's huge arm to block her path, the bucket dangling menacingly a few feet in front of her cart. He gave her a lazy two-fingered salute and went back to work. I walked over to meet her, my county-stamped permit in a clear plastic sleeve in my hand. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, Caldwell?" she shrieked, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the diesel engine. "You can't do this. My lawyer sent you a letter." "I'm conducting permitted erosion control on my property, Karen," I said calmly, holding up the permit for her to see. "This is a legal work site. You are trespassing. Again. I suggest you remove yourself and your vehicle before you get hurt." Her eyes bulged as she scanned the document, her brain struggling to process the official stamps and signatures. "Permit? You went behind my back. I'll have this stopped. I'm calling the authorities." "Go right ahead," I said, turning my back on her and walking over to consult with Marcus. "The sheriff's department is well aware of the county's permitting process." She fumbled with her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen. 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up. One was a younger deputy, the other a sergeant I recognized, a fellow veteran named Peterson with a calm, seen-it-all demeanor. Karen rushed to them, a torrent of accusations pouring out of her. "He's trying to destroy the golf course. He's building some kind of illegal canal. You have to arrest him." Sergeant Peterson listened patiently, his face impassive. Then he walked over to me. "Morning, Jack. Ma'am here says you're trying to reroute a river." "Morning, Sarge," I said, handing him the permit and a copy of the survey map. "Just doing a little county-approved erosion control, restoring a historical drainage channel on my own land. It's all right here." Peterson took his time, reviewing every page. He walked the line of bright orange stakes that marked out the channel, comparing it to the map. He looked at the overgrown gully we were clearing, and then at the plans. Finally, he walked back over to Karen, who was tapping her foot impatiently. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "Mr. Caldwell is in full compliance with his permit. The work is confined to his property. There is nothing we can do. In fact, you are the one trespassing. I need you to return to your property now." The color drained from Karen's face, replaced by a splotchy, apoplectic red. "Are you serious? You're taking his side? Do you know who I am? I am the president of the prestigious Pines HOA. I'll have your badge for this." Peterson didn't even blink. He just adjusted his belt and looked at her. "Ma'am, my only side is the law, and right now the law's on his side. If you don't leave his property immediately, I will cite you for trespassing. If you continue to interfere with this legal construction work, I will charge you with obstruction. The choice is yours." Defeated and utterly humiliated in front of the deputies and Marcus's crew, Karen sputtered, speechless for once. She glared at me, a look of pure, venomous hatred in her eyes, then spun her golf cart around and sped away, kicking up a rooster tail of perfectly manicured turf. The deputies stayed for another half hour, just to make sure she didn't come back. Before he left, Peterson gave me a slight nod. "Looks like you've got this handled, Jack. Just keep it legal." "Always do, Sarge," I replied. The rest of Monday and all of Tuesday were a symphony of diesel and dirt. Marcus was an artist with the excavator. He carved out the old channel with surgical precision, following the gentle, meandering curve from the old map. His sons worked behind him with the dump truck, hauling away the excess soil and overgrown brush, which we repurposed to build up the berms around my newly dry pond, preparing it for its eventual restoration. We uncovered the original stone-lined channel bed in several places, proof that we were indeed following the land's natural memory. By Tuesday evening, the channel was complete. A 200-yard-long, 20-foot-wide, 8-foot-deep trench, cutting a clean scar through the landscape, aimed directly at the heart of the prestigious Pines Golf Course. All that was left was to remove the final plug of earth that separated the channel from Miller's Creek. But we would wait until Wednesday afternoon for that, after the banks were fortified. As the sun set on Tuesday, I stood at the edge of the new channel and looked across my property. On one side was the dead empty pond. On the other was this massive man-made artery, waiting for a pulse. The forecast had been updated. The storm was tracking faster than expected. Heavy rains were now predicted to start Thursday morning. Everything was falling into place. Wednesday was reinforcement day. The air was thick and heavy, the sky a hazy, bruised-looking gray that promised the coming storm. A large flatbed truck arrived early, loaded with pallets of heavy riprap, large angular rocks used to armor shorelines and channels against erosion. and massive rolls of coconut fiber matting. Marcus and his sons worked with an efficiency that was beautiful to watch. While one son used a skid steer to ferry pallets of rock into the channel, Marcus and the other son carefully placed them along the newly carved banks, creating a solid, interlocking wall of stone that would withstand the initial, powerful surge of water. I worked alongside them, my muscles aching in a way they hadn't for years. It was satisfying work, physical and tangible. Every rock we placed was a nail in Karen's coffin. Every yard of matting we rolled out was another layer of legal and structural integrity for my plan. We focused on the outside curves of the channel, the points that would take the most force from the flowing water, ensuring they were over-engineered and indestructible. Around noon, a sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize pulled up to the end of my driveway and stopped. A man in an expensive suit got out. He wasn't Karen. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried a leather briefcase. He looked like the kind of man who billed his time in 6-minute increments. This had to be the HOA's lawyer, the one from the arrogant letter. He walked cautiously toward the worksite, his polished Italian loafers ill-suited for the terrain. "Mr. Caldwell," he called out, his voice smooth and condescending. "I'm Arthur Vance. I represent the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association. I think it's time we had a chat." I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of a dirty glove and walked over to meet him, leaving Marcus and his crew to their work. "A little late for a chat, isn't it, Mr. Vance?" I said, gesturing to the nearly completed channel. "My lawyer, David Chen, has been waiting for your call." Vance's eyes scanned the massive ditch, the piles of rock, the heavy machinery. A flicker of genuine concern crossed his face before being replaced by his professional mask of unflappable confidence. "My client was under the impression you were merely posturing," he said. "Clearly, we underestimated your commitment. However, you must understand that if this project of yours results in any damage to my client's property, the financial repercussions will be catastrophic for you." I almost laughed. "The only catastrophe I see, Mr. Vance, is the one your client created when she illegally drained my pond and destroyed a decade's worth of ecological development. The damage to my property is already real and quantified. What I'm doing here is legal, permitted, and on my own land. What happens downstream of my property line is, as they say, a pre-existing condition." I pulled out a folded copy of the old survey map showing the historical easement. "Your client's golf course was built on a floodplain. The developers took a shortcut when they diverted this creek 30 years ago. I'm simply correcting their oversight." He looked at the map, his jaw tightening. He was a smart man. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and he knew what it meant. His entire legal argument, based on the assumption that the current water flow was the only one that mattered, was built on sand. "This is an antique map," he sputtered, trying to find a foothold. "It's irrelevant." "It's a legally filed county survey, and it's very relevant," I countered, "and the county engineer seems to agree. Now, if you want to talk about making my pond whole again, paying the $75,000 in damages I've already incurred, and having your client issue a public apology, my lawyer is available. Otherwise, I have work to do." I turned to walk away. "This is madness," he called after me. "There's a storm coming. You can't possibly open that channel now." "The permit doesn't specify a date," I said over my shoulder, "and this erosion control is specifically designed to handle storm runoff." He stood there for a long time, a solitary, useless figure in a bespoke suit, watching us work. He finally retreated to his car and made a series of frantic phone calls. But it was too late. The gears of the machine I had set in motion were already grinding toward their inevitable conclusion. At 1500 hours, the reinforcement was complete. All that remained was the final critical step. Marcus climbed back into the cab of the excavator. He maneuvered the machine to the head of the channel, where a 10-foot-wide plug of earth was the only thing holding Miller's Creek in its man-made concrete diversion. With me and his sons watching, he lowered the bucket. The steel teeth bit into the earth. With 1, 2, 3 powerful scoops, the dam was breached. A trickle of water found its way into the new channel. Then more. The creek, as if sensing its ancient path had been restored, surged forward. A muddy brown wave flowed into our channel, testing the new banks, swirling around the riprap, and then gathering speed as it raced down the 200-yard course we had carved for it. It flowed past me, a torrent of liberation, shot out the end of the channel, crossed my property line, and disappeared into the trees on the edge of the 13th fairway. Project Floodgate was armed and active. Now all we had to do was wait for the rain. The rain started around 4 in the morning on Thursday. It wasn't a gentle shower, it was a deluge. The sound of it hammering on my metal roof was like a drum roll, a percussive announcement of what was to come. I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of black coffee, watching the darkness. I couldn't see the creek or the golf course, but I could feel the energy in the air. The earth was drinking, the streams were swelling, and the trap I had so carefully laid was about to be sprung by Mother Nature herself. I spent the morning tracking the storm on radar and listening to the weather radio. Flash flood warnings were issued for the entire county. The announcer advised residents in low-lying areas to be prepared. A grim smile touched my lips. The lowest lying area for miles was the manicured basin of the prestigious Pines Golf Course. Around 9 a.m., the rain let up for a bit, and I couldn't resist. I pulled on my waterproof gear and walked out to the edge of my property that overlooked the course. The sight was breathtaking. Miller's Creek, which was normally a gentle, gurgling stream, had become a raging, muddy torrent. It was pouring into my newly cut channel at a ferocious rate. The channel itself was performing perfectly, the riprap holding firm against the churning water, which was now a deep, angry brown. But the real spectacle was downstream. The water shot out of the end of my channel like it was fired from a cannon, a massive plume that carved a new, raw path through the rough and onto the pristine, emerald expanse of the 13th fairway. The fairway, with its subtle, carefully designed undulations meant to challenge golfers, was now acting as a series of terraces and pools. Water was backing up, spreading out, turning the sacred grass into a shallow, muddy lake. The sand trap on the 13th hole, a feature Karen was particularly proud of, was completely submerged. It looked like a child's sandbox after a downpour. The flow continued, following the path of least resistance, which, as the old map had predicted, was directly across the 14th fairway and toward the lowest point on the entire course, the large pond that guarded the 18th green. This wasn't just a little flooding. This was a complete and total hydraulic redesign, executed by gravity and a few inches of rain. As I watched, a golf cart appeared, moving frantically along a cart path on higher ground. It was Karen, with a man I recognized as the course superintendent. They stopped and stared, their body language a mixture of horror and disbelief. Karen was pointing, her arms flailing, her mouth moving in what I could only imagine was a torrent of panicked shrieks, though I couldn't hear her over the roar of the water. They had a problem, and it was getting worse by the minute. The water wasn't just pooling, it was flowing. A new river now bisected their golf course. The drainage systems they had installed, designed to handle sprinkler runoff and normal rainfall, were completely overwhelmed. Manholes were bubbling like geysers as the storm sewers backed up. The meticulously crafted landscape was being undone, returned to the swamp it had once been. I went back inside, my heart pounding with a feeling of dark, triumphant satisfaction. I made another pot of coffee and sat down at my dining room table, where the original demand letter lay. This was the consequence. This was the direct result of her arrogance. She had stolen the water from my small living pond to feed her sterile green monster. Now, a force of nature she couldn't control was drowning that monster in mud. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A message popped up almost immediately. It was Arthur Vance, the HOA lawyer. His voice was no longer smooth or condescending. It was strained, bordering on panicked. "Mr. Caldwell, Arthur Vance here. We have an emergency situation at the golf course. The flooding is extensive. We need to demand that you immediately block the channel you have dug and restore the water flow to the reservoir. We are prepared to dispatch a crew at our own expense to assist you. Please call me back immediately. We can discuss a resolution to our other disagreements." I listened to the message twice, savoring the desperation in his voice. A resolution. Now they wanted a resolution. They hadn't wanted a resolution when they were stealing my water. They hadn't wanted one when they were threatening me with lawsuits. They only wanted one now that their precious cash cow was being submerged. I deleted the message. I wasn't ready to talk. The rain had just started again, harder this time. The main event was just beginning. The full scope of their self-inflicted disaster had yet to reveal itself. The rain was relentless for the next 24 hours. It fell in sheets, a solid wall of water that turned my driveway into a shallow river and the world outside my windows into a gray, blurry watercolor. I didn't need to go outside to know what was happening. I could feel the ground vibrating with the sheer volume of water moving across it. My phone rang constantly. Calls from Arthur Vance, calls from unknown numbers I assumed were Karen or other board members, even a call from the non-emergency line at the sheriff's department, which I answered. It was Sergeant Peterson. "Jack, we're getting panicked calls from the HOA about catastrophic flooding," he said, his voice weary. "They're claiming your excavation is the cause." "My excavation is a permitted erosion control project that is functioning exactly as designed, Sarge," I replied calmly. "It's collecting storm runoff and routing it through a historical drainage easement. I believe the technical term for what's happening on their property is gravity." I could hear him sigh on the other end. "I figured as much. The county engineer already called me, said your project might actually be preventing worse flooding upstream. Just wanted to check in. Try to stay dry." "Will do," I said, and hung up. The establishment was on my side. The law, the engineers, the cops, they all saw this for what it was. Karen had no one to turn to. By Saturday morning, the storm had finally broken. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and a weak sun was trying to burn through the remaining clouds. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone. It was time to survey the aftermath. I walked to the edge of my property, the ground squelching under my boots. The channel was still flowing powerfully, but the water level had dropped slightly from its peak. It had held perfectly. Not a single stone of riprap was out of place. But the view of the golf course was apocalyptic. It was no longer a golf course. It was a swamp. The 13th and 14th fairways had completely disappeared under a vast muddy lake that stretched for hundreds of yards. The 18th hole, the signature finishing hole of Prestigious Pines, was the epicenter of the disaster. The pond that was supposed to be a scenic water hazard had merged with the floodwaters, its banks obliterated. The immaculate green, an island of perfect grass that the superintendent probably measured with a micrometer, was now an actual island surrounded by a churning brown moat. The entire hole was inaccessible. Debris, tree branches, leaves, and trash washed down from upstream was piled up against the footbridge that crossed to the green. The lower levels of the clubhouse, which sat on a rise overlooking the 18th, were clearly flooded. I could see sandbags stacked belatedly and uselessly around the doors to the pro shop and restaurant. The cost of this, I thought to myself, would be astronomical. Not just the cleanup, but the restoration. They'd have to drain the entire area. The turf on at least 4 or 5 holes was completely destroyed, smothered under a thick layer of silt and mud. The irrigation systems would be clogged. The sand traps would need to be completely rebuilt. The course would be closed for months, maybe longer. They had lost their entire peak season. As I stood there taking it all in, I saw a small group of people gathered on the clubhouse terrace. Even from a distance, I could recognize Karen's distinctive silhouette. They were staring at the devastation, a council of defeated rulers surveying their ruined kingdom. Then I saw something that made me smile. A small pump truck, identical to the one they had used on my pond, was parked near the clubhouse. A pathetic little hose was sucking water from the edge of the flood and spraying it onto a patch of higher ground. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They had created this problem because they didn't have enough water, and now they were utterly and hopelessly beaten because they had too much. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Dave. "Morning, Jack," he said, his voice cheerful. "I hear the weather's been a bit wet down your way." "You could say that," I replied, my eyes still fixed on the scene below. "I'm looking at about $20 million in landscaping damage." "I've been getting calls," he said, a note of glee in his voice. "Very desperate calls. Arthur Vance is ready to surrender unconditionally. He wants a meeting. All of us. You, me, him, and the entire HOA board. When? I asked. He's trying to arrange an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon, Sunday at the clubhouse. He wants you there. He said, and I quote, to discuss a global resolution to all outstanding issues. A global resolution, I repeated, the words tasting like victory. Tell him I'll be there. It's time to dictate the terms of their surrender. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Sunday in the main ballroom of the prestigious Pines Clubhouse, the parts of the building that weren't flooded anyway. Dave and I arrived a few minutes early. I wore a simple, clean polo shirt and jeans, my uniform of quiet confidence. Dave was in a sharp suit, carrying a briefcase full of our meticulously organized evidence. The mood in the clubhouse was funereal. Shell-shocked residents in expensive golf attire stood in small, quiet groups, murmuring and staring out the large picture windows at the muddy catastrophe that had been their playground. The smell of damp carpet and despair hung in the air. We were escorted to the ballroom. The entire board was seated at a long table at the front of the room, facing a small audience of about 30 concerned homeowners. Karen was in the center, at the president's seat, but she looked like a shadow of her former self. Her face was pale and puffy, her usual smugness replaced by a tight, brittle mask of anxiety. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, sat beside her, looking exhausted. As Dave and I took our seats in the front row, a hush fell over the room. All eyes were on me. I was the man who had, in their eyes, summoned the flood. Karen banged a gavel weakly. This emergency meeting of the prestigious Pines HOA board is now in session, she began, her voice strained. As you can all see, we have suffered an unprecedented weather event. The damage to our beautiful golf course is extensive. She couldn't even look at the residents, her eyes fixed on her notes. She launched into a prepared speech, full of euphemisms and blame shifting. She talked about unforeseeable storm surge and an act of God. She never once mentioned my pond, my property, or the channel. She was trying to control the narrative, to paint herself as a victim of circumstance. When she finished, Arthur Vance took over, his tone somber. The board is exploring all options for remediation. We are in contact with our insurance carriers, though preliminary discussions suggest that much of this may be classified as flood damage, which carries significant limitations on coverage. A murmur of alarm went through the crowd. This meant a massive special assessment was inevitable, a huge bill for every homeowner to cover the repairs. Furthermore, Vance continued, we have the outstanding dispute with the adjacent property owner, Mr. Caldwell. He finally looked at me. Mr. Caldwell's recent landscaping work, undertaken just before the storm, dramatically altered the water flow in the area. This was the moment. He was trying to pin it on me. Before he could continue, Dave stood up. If I may, Mr. Vance, he said, his voice ringing with authority, my client, Mr. Caldwell, did not alter the water flow. He restored it. Dave walked to the front of the room and began to lay out our case, not to the board, but to the homeowners. He presented the large, clear copies of the historical survey maps. He explained the legal standing of the drainage easement. He showed them the county-stamped permit. What Mr. Caldwell did was 100% legal, permitted, and documented, Dave stated, his voice booming. The truth is, this golf course was built on a lie. The developer saved a little money 30 years ago by illegally diverting a creek, and for 30 years, this community has been living on borrowed time. The bill has just come due. Then he pivoted. But this disaster isn't just an act of God. It was precipitated by an act of theft. He pulled out the photos and video I took of my pond being drained. He displayed the damage assessments from the biologist and the appraiser. He held up the arrogant, dismissive letter from Vance's law firm. On August 14th, Dave announced, your HOA president, Karen Miller, directed a contractor to trespass on Mr. Caldwell's property and illegally drain his private pond to water this golf course. When Mr. Caldwell attempted to resolve this with a simple demand for damages, he was threatened and insulted. He was left with no choice but to protect his property rights using the legal means available to him. This entire catastrophe, which will cost you all millions of dollars, happened for one reason. Karen Miller decided to steal a few thousand gallons of water. The room was dead silent. The homeowners were staring at Karen, their expressions shifting from concern to shock, and then to pure fury. An older man in the back, whom I recognized as Mr. Henderson, the one who had lost his prize roses, stood up. "Is this true, Karen? Did you pump his pond?" Karen stammered, looking to Vance for help, but the lawyer just stared grimly at his notepad. "It was an emergency for the good of the community," she began weakly. "The good of the community?" Another homeowner shouted. "You've ruined the community! You've bankrupted us!" The room erupted. The carefully controlled meeting descended into chaos as years of pent-up resentment against Karen's bullying and mismanagement boiled over. People were shouting, demanding her resignation, demanding an audit. The board members sitting next to her physically leaned away, isolating her. She was alone, shipwrecked in a sea of her own making. Dave let the chaos reign for a full minute before he held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Caldwell is not an unreasonable man," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "He is prepared to discuss a settlement, but it will be on his terms." He looked directly at the remaining board members. First, the immediate resignation of Karen Miller from the board. Second, a full and independent audit of the HOA's finances for the last 5 years. Third, the HOA will pay in full for the complete restoration of Mr. Caldwell's pond and all associated damages as itemized totaling $78,450. Fourth, a formal public letter of apology will be issued to Mr. Caldwell. And fifth, Mr. Caldwell will in exchange agree to work with a qualified engineering firm at the HOA's expense to find a permanent, mutually agreeable solution to the Millers Creek water flow issue. It was a masterstroke. I wasn't just the villain who flooded them. I was now the hero offering them a way out. I was offering them the key to fixing the problem I had so brilliantly created. The board, seeing the rage in the eyes of the homeowners, had no choice. One by one, they nodded. The vice president looked at Karen. "Karen," he said coldly, "you need to resign, now." Karen stared at him, her face a crumpled mask of defeat. The power she had welded for so long had evaporated in an instant. She mumbled something, pushed her chair back, and practically fled the room, a chorus of angry shouts following her. The war was over. I had won. In the weeks that followed, the terms of the surrender were executed with the precision of a military operation. Karen Miller's resignation was effective immediately, a terse, one-sentence email that signaled the end of her reign. The HOA board, under new leadership, moved quickly to demonstrate good faith. A check for the full $78,450 was delivered to Dave's office by courier within 3 days. The board also issued a formal letter of apology, which was posted on the community bulletin board and mailed to every resident. It acknowledged the illegal draining of my pond and the gross overreach of authority by the former president. The independent audit they commissioned quickly turned into a forensic accounting investigation. It turned out Karen's malfeasance went far beyond stealing my water. She had been using the HOA's credit card for personal expenses, awarding no-bid contracts to friends, and manipulating the budget to fund her own pet projects while essential maintenance was deferred. The sheer scale of her grift was staggering. The district attorney's office was notified, and criminal charges for embezzlement were now a very real possibility. My own project, the restoration of my pond, began almost immediately. Dr. Sharma, the aquatic biologist, oversaw the first phase. A specialized crew came in and removed the contaminated silt from the pond bed. They then laid down a new layer of bentonite clay to seal it, followed by nutrient-rich soil and gravel. We installed a new high-capacity well pump, paid for by the settlement, to refill it. Watching the clear, clean water pour into the empty basin was deeply satisfying. It was like watching a wound heal in fast motion. While the pond refilled, I worked with the engineering firm hired by the HOA. They were a team of sharp, practical hydrologists who, after reviewing my research and the historical data, fully concurred with my assessment. "You were right," the lead engineer told me. "This whole area is a natural wetland. The developers did a number on it. Together, we designed a permanent solution. We would keep my channel, but we'd add a controllable weir gate at the inlet. During normal conditions, the gate would divert a portion of the creek's flow back to the HOA's reservoir, ensuring their irrigation needs were met legally. But the channel itself would remain as a permanent, high-capacity storm overflow. During heavy rains, the excess water would automatically flow through my channel and into a series of newly designed retention ponds and wetlands that the engineers planned for the golf course. These wetlands would replace the ruined 13th and 14th holes, turning a disaster into a beautiful, functional, and environmentally sound water management feature. The HOA board, humbled and pragmatic, approved the plan enthusiastically. It was a solution that benefited everyone. I got my restored pond and a permanent safeguard against future flooding. The HOA got a legal, stable water source and a solution to their flooding nightmare that would, in the long run, be more attractive and less maintenance-intensive than the old fairways. They even planned to build a small nature trail with educational plaques around the new wetlands. One afternoon, a few weeks into the restoration, I was down by my now half-full pond, installing native aquatic plants along the new shoreline. A car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. It was a beat-up old sedan, and the woman who got out was barely recognizable as Karen. Gone was the expensive tracksuit, replaced by drab, ill-fitting clothes. Her hair was a mess, and her face was etched with stress and defeat. She approached me hesitantly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice small, stripped of all its former arrogance. I just wanted to... I'm sorry." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. I felt no anger, no pity, just a kind of weary finality. "Sorry for draining my pond, or sorry for getting caught?" She flinched, but she didn't run. "Both," she whispered, looking at the ground. "I got carried away. I like the power. I like being in charge. I lost sight of everything. Now, I've lost everything. My house is in foreclosure. I have lawyers' bills I can't pay. I might be going to jail." I didn't say anything. I just let her words hang in the air. "I just wanted you to know," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "You were right. I was wrong. I'm sorry for what I did to your pond. It was a beautiful place." She turned and walked back to her car without another word. It wasn't a satisfying confrontation. It was just sad. A pathetic end to a petty tyranny. A few more weeks passed. The pond was full, the water crystal clear. Dr. Sharma helped me reintroduce a starter population of native fish, frogs, and invertebrates. I bought a few new koi, small ones this time, and watched them explore their new, clean home. Marcus and his sons came by one Saturday and helped me build a small wooden pier. We sat on it with a couple of cold beers, looking out over the water. The new HOA president, a reasonable retired teacher named Sarah, had become a good acquaintance. She and a few other neighbors from prestigious Pines even came over for a barbecue. They looked at my restored pond not with envy, but with a kind of respect. It was a symbol, not of my victory over them, but of the community's victory over the cancer of abuse that had infected it. The new wetlands on the golf course were starting to take shape, and the sound of birds was already returning to an area that had once only heard the whisper of golf carts. My life was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the quiet of retreat, but the quiet of earned peace. I had been tested, and I had not only defended my small piece of the world, but I had also, inadvertently, made the larger world around it a little bit better. I had faced down a bully, not with fists or fury, but with maps, laws, and the unyielding power of water. And as I sat on my pier, watching the sunset paint the surface of my living pond in shades of orange and gold, I knew with absolute certainty that justice, like water, will always find its own level.